He just wishes he can't handle the smoke of BK.
Hey guys, so today I'm going to be breaking down the 2020 regular season. I'm going to be doing a little bit of a recap of each team's road to the playoffs or where they finished in the regular season, whether that's last place all the way to first place. So to start us off, we have the 10th place team, Team Harry Butt, aka Nolan, and his overall record was 3-10. And in divisional games, he was 2-6, and in 10-point games, which are just games decided by 10 points or less, he was only 1-3. And in the previous season, he finished sixth place and ended up going to the championship, actually coming in second place overall. But this is a bit of a drop off, a major drop off from last season. And he's the first team outside of Dan Corcoran to have double digit losses in a season. And Dan Corcoran obviously did that twice in 2015 and 17. And he did start off pretty well at 2-1 and ended up going 1-9 over the course of 10 games, which is the worst of any 10-game stretch in league history. And the biggest win or loss of the year was probably week 6, his loss to Drew. It was a 3-point game, and of course, this was the garbage time miracle where Kenyon Drake went 60 yards to the house and ended up beating Nolan by a score of 3 points. And for his points and points allowed, he finished 9th in points for and 4th in points allowed, which is pretty bad when you have a lot of points against and not many to show for it. So it's hard to get anywhere in this league when you do something like that. And in ninth place, we have Team Human Donut, aka Max. And his overall record was 4-9. And in the division, he was actually pretty decent at 3-5. And in 10-point games, he was pretty good as well at 3-0. And of course, last year he finished in fifth place and had a first round exit, but fifth place nonetheless. And this is also a bit of a drop off from last season. And he too also started 2-1 and finished the season 2-8. And one of those wins was, of course, against Nolan. And one of the things that really tanked his season was the Saquon Barkley injury week 2. And it really just went downhill from there because, of course, when you lose your first round pick, it's not going to end well usually. And the biggest win or loss for Max at this point was probably week 3, his win over Nick, which was about a 4-point victory. And this was, of course, the game DK Metcalf fumbled the ball on the 1-yard line. And if so, walking into the end zone, Nick would have won the game by a slim margin. And his points against and points for were pretty lopsided. He finished 10th in points for and first in points allowed, which of course will never end well for anyone. And next we have BK, aka BK for playoffs, and he finished 6-7, which ties his best record of all time. Actually, sorry, he finished 6-6 in 2016, but is very close to his best record of all time. And he did very well in the division as well. He finished 4-3, and in those 10-point games, he only had one of them, but he did win that one pretty well. And in his previous regular season, he finished 7th place and was only 10 points away from making the playoffs over Nolan. And the longest winning streak for BK during the season was only 2 games, and this came in the last 2 weeks of the season, which is pretty crazy because generally when you think of fantasy, you think of streaks, think of winning, losing a bunch in a row, but that was definitely not the case for BK. But one of the things that really was terrible for his season were the injuries to Christian McCaffrey, OBJ, and Nick Chubb. And I think, honestly, without even one of those injuries all year, he might have easily walked into the playoffs because he was really only one game and a decent amount of points away from that. But his biggest win or loss was the Week 6 win over Louie, where he did win an event to the garbage time miracle. Zane Gonzalez kicks the extra point after Kenyon Drake scores. So that was a pretty crazy week, of course. Everybody remembers that. And that gave him a huge win over Louie, which essentially knocked Louie out of the playoffs. And his total points and total points allowed, he finished 7th in both categories, pretty even overall. So it's kind of hit or miss each week if he's going to win or lose. It's pretty even, 6-7. That's what you'll probably get most of the time. And in 7th place, we have Team Bobby, aka Louie. And this was probably the craziest season I've ever seen in a team. His overall record was only 6-7, which does not show his team throughout the year. And he had a 4-4 divisional record. And in those 10-point games, that's really what swung it to the other teams here. He was 0-3 in 10-point games. And his previous season finish was 8th place, which was pretty close to this. It was a step up, yes, but I think Louis could have gone a lot farther this year if only a little bit of luck was on his side. And he's the only team to ever finish top 2 in scoring and miss the playoffs. And this is also the first year no 6-win team did not make the playoffs since 2015. And I'd say his biggest win or loss was the Week 8 loss to Nick. Of course, we already talked about the events of the Garbage Time Miracle with Zane Gonzalez kicking the extra point. But I'd say the bigger loss was the Week 8 loss to Nick by only 1.5 points. Of course, if you remember this game, it came down to Monday night where Ronald Jones fumbled the ball on one of his first touches and was benched the rest of the game. So this was very unlikely to happen. If only he got 1.5 more points, Louie probably would be in the playoffs. And his total points for and total points allowed, this is the craziest part in my opinion. He finished second in scoring, which again has never missed the playoffs, and he had the least amount of points by a large margin. And somehow this team does not make the playoffs. That is just insane to me, and I think this is one of the craziest teams I've ever seen. And next we have Team Chum. And his overall record was 7-6, and he did pretty well in his division at 5-3, but in those 10-point games he was 0-1. And his previous regular season finish was second place as he won the division last year at 7-6 as well. But he's the first team to make the playoffs after starting 0-3, and he did end up going 7-3 in his last 10 games, which is pretty good. He had to win 4 in a row in his last 4 games to make the playoffs, and of course he did, as he's the 6th place team this year. And the biggest win or loss was probably Week 11, the win over Louie, because he did not do very well this game, only 104 points for, but without a win right here, he would not be in, and Louie would be in the playoffs as well. And his total points for and points against were pretty even. He finished 5th place and 6th place in each category, so it's pretty even, only about 4 points a game difference. It's an even record, 7-6, probably what you're gonna get when you have when you have those points against. And next we have Team Ja, aka Majure, and his overall record does not reflect how good his team was this year. He was 7-6 on the year and 2-6 in his division, so he's undefeated against non-division opponents. And in the 10-point games that he had, he only had 2 of them. He was 0-2, and last year, of course, he did finish 10th place, which was insane as well. But this is a huge step up and honestly should be much higher on this list. And he did start 0-2 with only 207 points scored, but with the acquisition of James Robinson in Week 2, who ended up being RB4, and Antonio Gibson trade, he ended up getting the RB4 and RB6 along with Derrick Henry, who is right now RB2. And I'd say the biggest win or loss for Major this year was Week 11, his loss to Drew. He only lost by about 4 points, and this was a very close game, and I think if he wins this game, he would be very close to the bye, and him and Drew would essentially switch spots. And his total points and points allowed were 1st in points and 5th in points allowed, which does not reflect someone's record like that. Usually when you score 1st in scoring, you're going to have around 8 wins, but that just seemingly was not the case, as he was somewhat unlucky this year. And next we have Team Drewboy, and his overall record was 8-5, and his divisional record was 5-3. And in those 10-point games, he was 3-2, which is insane to me that he has 5 games decided by 10 points or fewer. And his previous regular season finish record was 8-5 as well, but he finished in 3rd place. So a little bit of step back this year. But here's a crazy stat that I found about Drew's team. He's 8-0 when scoring above 115 points. So when you face Drew, whether that be in the playoffs next year, if he scores above 115 points, you should expect to lose 100% of the time. And he also did have 8 different starting QBs through the course of the season. Ended up dropping Matthew Stafford, Mike Lennon, a bunch more, Ryan Tannehill. But the biggest win or loss of Drew's season was definitely probably, other than the Garbage Time Miracle, it was probably Week 4, the win over Louie. It really cemented that Louie would miss the playoffs and Drew would make it, because without a win here, even though it was Week 4, looking back on it, if Drew loses this game, Drew is out of the playoffs and Louie is in. And this came down to only 5 points, and if Louie would have started George Kittle, this would have switched everything. Louie would be in the playoffs, and Drew would have been the 7th seed. And the total points for and total points allowed, they're pretty surprisingly low at 8th place for points for and 9th place for points against, which generally when you have 9th place in points allowed, you're generally going to have a better record, of course, because this game is about points allowed. And next we have Team Graziano, aka Alex, and his overall record was 8-5, and he only had 6 divisional games, and he finished 3-3 in those games. And in the games decided by 10 points or fewer, he was 2-0. And his previous regular season finish was first place, as he finished 9-4. So technically it is a step back, but 8-5 is nothing to complain about. But he did start the season pretty poorly at 1-3, but he ended up going on a 4-game winning streak. And he turned out to be pretty good with Davante Adams in his lineup. He was 7-3 when Davante Adams was healthy. So watch out for him in the playoffs, because with Davante active, he is a really good team and really hard to beat. And this year is also surprising because he never once scored under 100 points, which is pretty much hard to do because each year every team is going to have at least one bad game. But it didn't seem to be the case for Alex this year. But his biggest win or loss of the season was the Week 5 win over Drew. And he won this game by only about 10 points, which is pretty close. But without this win, Drew and him would switch places again. And this really just catapulted his team to that 4-game winning streak that I talked about earlier. And his total points for and points against were pretty even as well. They finished third in both categories. So it's not surprising that he finished a little close to 500. As generally when you have a lot of points against, you're not going to do very well, but surprisingly he did finish 8-5. And next we have Dabers, aka Nick, and his overall record was 7-6, and he was 4-3 in those 7 divisional games, and in those 10-point games he was 2-1, which really helped him out this year. And his previous finish was 4th place, as he also finished 7-6, but he started out the season very hot, as he was 7-3, but ended up losing 3 straight and almost losing the division, as he only won the division by 10.2 points over Chum. But the thing to remember from this season was he acquired Kyler Murray mid-season from Nolan, and this was a really lopsided trade. And he did go 5-4 after this trade, but Kyler Murray, of course, in the middle of the season when Nick's team was looking insane, was going crazy. That just helped him go on a 4-game winning streak, and this really helped him take the division and finish 7-6. But his biggest win or loss actually came, I'd say, Week 1, his win over Chum. It was only by about 1 point, and of course we all remember this. It was Juju Smith-Schuster scoring a touchdown with literally 5 minutes left. It, of course, makes me mad. Finishing the game like that is a great way to win, but a terrible way to lose. But without this win, he would have actually missed the playoffs, as Louie also would have gotten in this way with more points for, and Chum would have taken the bye at 8-5. But his total points for and against were 4th place in points and 2nd in points allowed, which is literally 0.1 behind Max for the league leading in points allowed. And lastly, we have Team Norberg, aka Brenden, and this was a really surprising year for him, as previously he had finished below 500 both years, and this was a really big step up as he finished 9-4, which is really that elite category that you're looking for. And he was 4-2 in those 6 division games and 2-0 in those 10-point games. And his previous rank, of course, was 9th place, which is 9th to 1st place is a huge jump. And this is also his first appearance in the playoffs. And he's also the 6th team, only the 6th team to win the division. And so that's really surprising. He's only the 5th team to ever get a bye. And that's pretty astounding in only his 3rd season. And surprisingly, he's 7-0 in games where Travis Kelce scores at least 1 touchdown. So when you see Travis Kelce get into that end zone, that combo of him and Mahomes, that's probably going to end your game right there, honestly. But his biggest win or loss of the season was the Week 13 win over Majure. And this was, in a sense, a conference championship. And he did win by a slim margin, about 5 points. And this was, of course, because Antonio Gibson terribly got injured and left the game in the first quarter, only scoring 1.4 points. So this was a terrible loss for Majure, and this essentially gave Brenden the bye right here. And his total points for and points allowed, while they did dip towards the end of the season as he was towards the top and at the beginning of the season, he did finish 6th and 4th in points for and points allowed, which is nothing to complain about, honestly, because when you have a decent amount of points for, you're always gonna get by, and with some luck, of course, in those 10-point games, he did very well and squeaked through that tough division in the East. And this is just a chart I came together with points scored and points allowed. This kind of just compares each team. As you can see, most teams are pretty even, like Alex, BK, Chum. They're all pretty even in their points for and points allowed. But then when you look at teams like Louie, he has a lot of points scored but few points allowed, which is very surprising that he did not make the playoffs. But if you also look back at teams like Max, as you can see, he had an insane amount of points allowed and very few points to show for that. So obviously with that lopsided deal, you're not going to do very well in this league. And lastly, I just got together the total moves on the season. As you can see, it's pretty even except for about one or two outliers, and that would be Drew at 74 total moves on the season and Max with about 55 moves on the season with pickups and everything going on. And as you can see, it's kind of low for the trades each year. Not much to complain about. I mean, if you don't want to trade, you don't want to trade. But it just seemed like this year, especially with all the injuries, the trading was at a limit. And there was a few teams with one or no trades at all. I think there was a total of 4 with one or fewer trades. And Chum was very close to getting that record at 9 trades, and he was only 2 off the tying the record of Alex in 2018 of 11 trades. So this is just a little recap of what we just talked about. These are all the seedings, and this is how the playoffs is going to go down. Of course, in a regular conventional bracket, the 6 seed would go on to play the 1 seed, but in this, we're just going to keep it simple. In the 3 versus 6 seed, whoever wins that game goes on to play Nick, and same thing with the 4v5. Whoever wins that game goes on to play Brenden as the 1 seed. And that's it for the video, and I just really want to thank you guys. And I know I haven't been doing much of these lately, especially with fantasy going on. It's pretty hard to get these done when you're grinding on the season. But this was just really fun, and I loved the season, and this was the most competitive season, I'd say. Most competitive and crazy season for sure of this league, and hopefully it gets a lot crazier from here. Thanks, guys. See you.